The sons of Levi, the sons of Judah, and the sons of Benjamin shall fight against all their troops when the exiles of the sons of light return from the wilderness of the peoples to camp in the wilderness of Jerusalem.
In this aspect, the War Scroll and more widely accepted biblical texts are in sync.
The Bible very clearly teaches that in the end of days, there's going to be a gathering of the tribes of Israel in the latter days, and the enemy is going to gather against that, of course, in the 1st century BC. Well, there's no 12 tribes of Israel in the land of Judea. There's basically the 3 that are listed as part of the sons of light, and that is Levi, Judah, and Benjamin.
If the War Scroll is indeed accurate, its predictions surrounding the return by the Jewish people to Israel aligns with apocalyptic texts in the Bible. Believers point to 2 events in the 20th century that indicate the prophecy of the Jewish people returning to the Holy Land.
Primarily in 1917, Britain took control of Palestine. In the Balfour Declaration, they invited Jews from all over the world back to Israel.
This began, according to many fundamentalist Christians, the last days or final judgment of mankind, as described in the Bible.
There are some elements in Israeli society that have the ethos of this final apocalyptic days mentality, and a lot of evangelicals and fundamentalists in our world that we're familiar with have a similar mindset, and they see the foundation of the state of Israel as stepping stones to this final apocalyptic situation.
On May 14, 1948, the State of Israel was established. But its Arab neighbors would not recognize it. Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq all attacked the next day, starting a bloody year-long war, the first of many.
The Arabs had been committed to the idea that the creation of a Jewish state was unfair and unjust, and that there shouldn't be a Jewish state in the region. So they went to war to try to prevent it, to strangle it basically at birth, and try to prevent it from being created. The Israelis ended up winning that war.
For some, this series of battles clearly marked the beginning of the final fulfillment of the War Scroll, which speaks of 6 battles in which the sons of light and the sons of darkness clash before the final showdown.
3 times the sons of light triumph, but not ultimately. They just are victorious at that moment, but can't really win. 3 times the sons of darkness triumph, but also not enough to vanquish the sons of light.
Could the Arab-Israeli War of 1948 be the first of these battles? Believers in this theory suggest 4 other Arab-Israeli wars were also predicted in the War Scroll. But what of the ancient Essenes? Some believers argue that the ancient cult saw their own demise as the first battle between lightness and darkness.
These writers of these scrolls clearly understood that these things could possibly happen during their immediate lifetime because the Romans were persecuting them.
Skeptics of the War Scroll prophecy suggest the Essenes simply predicted their own downfall, and not one of future generations.
These apocalyptic groups in Israel fomented strife during the 1st century AD, and it culminated in this absolutely immense and disastrous war against the Romans, which began in 66 AD. The apocalyptic groups, the Essenes if you like, were totally defeated. Those who weren't killed fled into Egypt, where they were captured, tortured to death. Others were captured by the Romans and died in the various arenas up the coast of Palestine, or even back in Rome. They were wiped out completely.
If we accept that 6 of the 7 battles noted in the War Scroll may have already occurred, when might the final battle take place? And against whom? Is the War Scroll simply an ancient manual that outlines military strategy? Or is it, as some suggest, a prophetic vision of a Third World War? According to believers in the War Scroll, the apocalyptic prophecy written by an ancient Jewish cult 2,000 years ago may be converging with current events.
In the end, it could be a very painful and difficult process, and no one can be sure who's going to be around to see the end of the story. The scenario is a very scary one.
In a funny way, we can say that the motivation of the people who wrote the War Scroll are very, very similar to the motivation of people today who are expecting a Battle of Armageddon in the Middle East at any moment. And that can only be considered very, very dangerous, because the belief systems we hold affects our behavior. And if we believe something to be true, and if we believe something is going to happen, the chances are we might actually cause it to do so.
The authors of the War Scroll, the Essenes, believed a future war will be led by a satanic figure known as Belial, who will be joined by the immoral and those who have turned their backs on God. Some interpretations of the War Scroll suggest the sons of light and the sons of darkness have been locked in battles since the time of Jesus. But some experts wonder whether the scroll's relevance in today's world can even be determined.
It's very open in terms of the text itself. What you have are the people who think they're on the side of right and the people who they think are the enemies of right. What I'm trying to say here is that when people employ the War Scroll for modern-day political discussions, it tells us more about their own ideology than about what it says in the War Scroll.
For those who see literal meaning in the document's text, they consider modern Israelis as the direct descendants of the original Sons of Light. They point to passages such as,
"For the God of Israel has called out a sword against all the nations, and by the holy ones of his people he will do mightily."
Jewish people have always viewed themselves as having this very unique mission of being a nation whose job it is to elevate the entire world, to rid the world of evil, and to bring the world back to the ideal spiritual state it was before everything fell apart, back to the Garden of Eden, so to speak.
Similar to Essenes, some devout practitioners of the Jewish faith today have interpreted the Hebrew Bible and its laws as strictly divine or transmitted by God, especially regarding prophecy related to the coming of the Messiah. They claim this Bible and the prophecy of the War Scroll both point to the establishment of the State of Israel as a sign of the end times. They also point to another prophecy that may very well lead to Armageddon.
There is today in Israel a small community that is driven by a kind of messianic fervor and wants to reestablish the Third Temple, believing that that is a step in the messianic process, that eventually that is what will bring the Messiah and the end of days. This is, of course, a very problematic issue because right now that is the site of a Muslim mosque, and you can imagine it's a very complicated issue.
That site, where the Temple of Solomon, the most sacred site in all Judaism, once stood over 2,500 years ago, is on Jerusalem's Temple Mount.
The Temple Mount is very significant for the Jewish people because that's where, according to their tradition, Abraham went to sacrifice his son. It's also where David built the first temple. And in the temple you had the Ark of the Covenant, which had the Holy of Holies. The only place on earth where the Spirit of God actually was on earth. So there could be no place holier for the Jewish people than the Temple Mount.
The Islamic faith also holds the Temple Mount as sacred. Referred to as the Noble Sanctuary by Muslims, the Temple Mount is the third holiest site in Islam. According to the Quran, the Prophet Muhammad traveled to Jerusalem in the 7th century AD and ascended to heaven from the Temple Mount. On that spot today stands the Al-Aqsa Mosque, as well as the Dome of the Rock, completed in 691 AD. The site is layered with overlapping beliefs and long-standing grievances.
Israel has at least physical possession of the Temple Mount. Even though legally it's a little more complicated, they've ceded that. They've ceded legal authority to the Muslim religious authorities. But at least the kind of technical possibility, logistically, Israel could say, well, we want to go ahead and build a temple. So that has raised the level of engagement, the level of involvement among these groups, trying to push for actually something happening.
But there's more. Some fundamentalist Christians believe that rebuilding Solomon's temple will hasten Jesus' return, so they too are lobbying for its construction.
There are some members of the evangelical community in the United States who are supportive of this, believing, of course, that that Messianic Jewish group has everything right except for the identity of the Messiah.
Now, how they actually expect this to occur is anybody's guess, because I think the meaning of jihad will be finally apparent if they try to destroy the buildings on the Temple Mount.
The Muslim world would undoubtedly be up in arms if the current Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque were destroyed and a Jewish temple was built in its place. It would be Armageddon.
The Dome of the Rock, Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the site where the Temple of Solomon once stood. Each elicits extraordinary passion in those who consider this place sacred above all others. Some fear that fanatical believers of the War Scroll may become emboldened to take a critical step. Rebuild the Third Temple. And according to their belief, trigger the battle of the Sons of Lightness and the Sons of Darkness.
The great hand of God shall overcome Belial and all the angels of his dominion. That wickedness be overcome without a remnant. There shall be no survivors of all the sons of darkness.
Those who have researched the War Scroll say there is some logic to the belief that it and other doomsday prophecies may be converging. They theorize that the Middle East remains a crossroads of civilization and the battlefield of Armageddon. According to the War Scroll,
the heavens open. The sword of God comes down. Michael comes down, the archangel, to lead the sons of light.
At some point, God would intervene, defeat the enemy by a non-human sword, whatever that meant. And so they leave it very cryptic in there to allow God to intervene in any way that he so chose.
What could this non-human sword be? Some powerful weapon that only God wields? Some unexplainable tool of divine intervention? Nobody knows for sure.
At the end of time, we have the return of the Messiah in Islam, in Judaism, and Christianity. Now, whether these three messiahs are the same person, or whether there are three different messiahs who then have to fight it out, no one knows. But the fact remains that this huge battle, which is talked about in texts, if it's believed in, and if these beliefs inform the lives of those who believe it, then who's to say that it won't occur?
The future is as yet unwritten, but perhaps